The rain pounded against the windshield as Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. His eyes were fixed on the dark, ominous gates of the River's Edge Homeowners Association, the place he had once proudly called home. Now, it was a fortress of corruption, a web of deceit and power that he was determined to untangle, no matter the cost. Ethan's jaw tightened as he remembered the confrontation that had set all of this in motion. It had been a seemingly innocuous dispute over a fence, but the HOA's response had been anything but. They had threatened legal action, imposed crippling fines, and even gone so far as to tamper with his property. But Ethan was no fool. He had seen the patterns, the hidden agendas, and the web of lies that the HOA had constructed to maintain their iron grip over the community. With a deep breath, Ethan stepped out of his car, the rain soaking his clothes as he approached the gates. His fingers danced across the keypad, bypassing the security protocols with ease, a trick he had learned after months of painstaking research. The gates groaned open, and Ethan stepped into the eerie silence of the HOA, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows across the deserted streets. As he walked, Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle he had been unraveling for weeks. He knew that the HOA's president, Karen Wilkins, was the mastermind behind the corruption, using her position to line her own pockets and silence any dissenters. But Ethan had a plan, a meticulously crafted strategy that would bring her empire crashing down. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught his eye. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest, as a figure emerged, its features obscured by the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice tense and guarded. A light flashed, momentarily blinding Ethan, and a familiar voice spoke. "Well, well, if it isn't our troublemaker neighbor, Ethan." Karen Wilkins stepped forward, her lips curled into a malicious grin. "I was wondering when you'd show your face around here again." Ethan's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of the HOA president, her expensive designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair, a stark contrast to the gloomy, rain-soaked surroundings. "Karen," he spat, "I should have known you'd be skulking around here like the cockroach you are." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, Ethan, you have no idea what you're up against. This is my kingdom, and you're just a pawn in my game." She took a step closer, her voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "I've been watching you, you know. I know about your little investigation, your attempts to expose my, shall we say, extracurricular activities." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, but he refused to back down. "So, what are you going to do, Karen? Have me arrested? Threaten my family again?" He took a step forward, his eyes burning with determination. "I'm not afraid of you or your goons. I'm going to bring you down, no matter what it takes." Karen's laughter echoed through the empty streets, and Ethan knew that he had just taken the first step into a deadly game of cat and mouse. With the FBI surveillance team monitoring his every move, he had to be careful. One wrong step could mean the end of his crusade against the corrupt HOA. As the rain continued to pelt down, Ethan knew that the battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. He was ready to fight, no matter the cost. The rain had finally stopped, but the ominous clouds still loomed overhead as Ethan made his way to the community center, the heart of the River's Edge Homeowners Association. He knew that he was being watched, the eyes of Karen's goons following his every move, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. As he approached the towering glass doors, Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing with the next step of his plan. He had spent weeks meticulously gathering evidence, piecing together the puzzle of the HOA's corruption, and now was the time to strike. Pushing open the doors, Ethan stepped into the grand lobby, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The place was bustling with activity, homeowners rushing to and fro, their faces etched with worry and frustration. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of Karen or her cronies. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the din. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident troublemaker." Ethan turned to see Karen Wilkins striding towards him, her heels clicking against the floor. I must say, I'm impressed that you've managed to make it this far. But you know what they say, curiosity killed the cat. Ethan stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. I'm not here to play games, Karen. I have evidence. Irrefutable proof of your corruption, your embezzlement, and your blatant disregard for the well-being of this community. Karen's eyes narrowed, and Ethan could see the muscles in her jaw tightening. Evidence, you say? She let out a derisive laugh. You have no idea what you're up against, Ethan. This is my kingdom, and I'm not about to let some nosy little homeowner bring it all crashing down. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. That's where you're wrong, Karen. I've been working with the FBI, and they've been monitoring your every move. It's over. Your reign of terror is coming to an end. The color drained from Karen's face, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. But it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. You think the FBI can stop me? She hissed. I have friends in high places, Ethan. They'll bury your little investigation so deep that no one will ever find it. Ethan shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. That's where you're wrong, Karen. I've got a backup plan. One that will ensure that your dirty little secrets are exposed for the world to see. Karen's eyes widened, and Ethan could see the panic starting to set in. What are you talking about? She demanded. I've got a thumb drive, Ethan replied, his voice calm and steady. It's loaded with all the evidence I've gathered, financial records, email correspondence, even video footage of your illegal activities. And if anything happens to me, or if I fail to check in at a specific time, that thumb drive will automatically upload to the internet for the whole world to see. Karen's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might lunge at him. But then, a strange calm washed over her features, and she let out a low chuckle. Well, Ethan. I have to hand it to you. You're certainly more clever than I gave you credit for. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you know what they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And you, my friend, are about to learn that the hard way. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as Karen turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor. He knew that he had just stepped into a game of high-stakes cat and mouse, and the stakes had never been higher. As he watched Karen disappear into the crowd, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He knew that the battle had only just begun, and that he would need to be on his toes every step of the way. The rain had started again, the heavy droplets pounding against the windows of Ethan's car as he sat in the empty parking lot, his mind racing. He had just come from the community center, where his confrontation with Karen Wilkins had left him with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Ethan knew that he was playing a dangerous game, one that could have devastating consequences if he made even the slightest misstep. Karen was a formidable opponent, with a network of powerful allies and a ruthless streak that knew no bounds. But Ethan was determined to bring her down, no matter the cost. As he sat there, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel, Ethan's eyes were drawn to the small thumb drive in his hand. It was the key to his backup plan, the trump card that he had been saving for just such a moment. But he knew that using it would be a last resort, a move that could potentially escalate the situation to a level he was not prepared to handle. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught his eye, and Ethan tensed, his hand reaching for the door handle. But then, a familiar figure emerged, and Ethan let out a relieved sigh. Agent Wilkins, he said, nodding to the FBI agent who had been monitoring his investigation. I'd assume you saw what just happened back there. The agent nodded, her face grave. We did, she said, her voice low and serious. Karen Wilkins is a formidable opponent, and she's not going to go down without a fight. Ethan leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. I know, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. But I'm not going to let her win. I've got too much at stake here. Agent Wilkins nodded, her expression thoughtful. I understand, she said. But you need to be careful, Ethan. Karen has a lot of resources at her disposal, and she's not afraid to use them. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he thought about the implications of what Agent Wilkins was saying. You're telling me that my life could be in danger, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The agent nodded, her eyes grave. That's exactly what I'm telling you, she said. Karen is not going to let you take her down without a fight, and she's not above using unconventional methods to protect her empire. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as he processed this information. He had known that this was a high-stakes game, but the thought of Karen Wilkins targeting him and his family was a terrifying prospect. What do I do? He asked, his voice trembling. Agent Wilkins leaned forward, her eyes intense. You need to be vigilant, Ethan, she said. Stick to your plan, but be prepared for anything. And if you ever feel like you're in immediate danger, get in touch with us right away. Ethan nodded, his mind already whirring with contingency plans and backup strategies. He knew that he was up against a formidable foe, but he was determined to see this through to the end. As the agent turned to leave, Ethan called out to her. Agent Wilkins, he said, thank you for everything. The agent nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Just be careful, Ethan, she said, before disappearing back into the shadows. Ethan sat there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the stakes had just been raised, and that he would need to be more vigilant than ever if he was going to bring Karen Wilkins and her corrupt HOA empire down. With a deep breath, Ethan started his car and pulled out of the parking lot, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. He was in this fight for the long haul, and he was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The sound of the rain drumming against the roof of Ethan's car was the only thing that broke the eerie silence as he made his way through the deserted streets of River's Edge. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his mind racing with the implications of his confrontation with Karen Wilkins and the FBI agent's dire warning. As he turned the corner, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There, in the middle of the road, was a figure sprawled on the ground, unmoving. His heart pounding, Ethan pulled over and rushed to the person's aid, praying that it wasn't one of Karen's goons. But as he knelt beside the figure, a wave of relief washed over him. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Langford, a kindly old woman who had always been a staunch supporter of his fight against the HOA. Mrs. Langford, he cried, gently shaking her shoulder. Are you all right? The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Ethan, she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. You have to get out of here. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? He asked, his hands gripping her arm gently. It's Karen. Mrs. Langford rasped, her eyes darting around nervously. She found out about the evidence you have. She's trying to stop you. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as the realization dawned on him. Mrs. Langford, what happened? He asked, his voice tense. I was just taking out the trash, the woman said, her voice shaking. And then she came out of nowhere. She pushed me, Ethan. I fell, and I think I hit my head. Ethan's heart sank as he took in the woman's words. Karen had attacked her, all because of the evidence he had gathered. He knew that he had to get out of here before she came back to finish the job. All right, Mrs. Langford, he said, gently helping her to her feet. Let's get you to the hospital. You need to get checked out. As they made their way to Ethan's car, a sudden movement in the shadows caught his eye. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest, as a figure emerged into the dim light. Well, if it isn't my favorite troublemaker, Karen Wilkins purred, her voice dripping with venom. I must say, I'm impressed that you've managed to evade me this long. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline as he positioned himself between Karen and Mrs. Langford, shielding the older woman with his body. "What do you want, Karen?" he growled, his eyes narrowing. Karen let out a cold laugh. "What do I want?" she sneered. "I want you to stop interfering in my business, Ethan. I want you to keep your nose out of my affairs and leave well enough alone." Ethan felt his blood boil as he listened to her words. "So, you attack an innocent woman just to get to me?" He spat. "That's low, even for you, Karen." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flash of something that looked like regret. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she said, her voice suddenly softer. "It was an accident. I just needed to send a message." Ethan shook his head, disgust written all over his face. "A message?" he scoffed. "You're a monster, Karen. And I'm not going to stop until I've brought you and your corrupt HOA down." Karen's expression hardened, and Ethan knew that he had pushed her too far. "Then you'll have to go through me first," she hissed, taking a step forward. Ethan braced himself, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he was in a fight for his life, and he was determined to emerge victorious. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension as Ethan and Karen faced off, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Ethan's mind was racing, searching for a way out of this precarious situation. But he knew that Karen was a formidable opponent, one who wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to get what she wanted. "So, this is how it's going to be, huh?" Ethan said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "You're willing to go to these lengths to protect your precious HOA empire." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "You have no idea what you're up against, Ethan," she spat. "This is my kingdom, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep it intact." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, where Mrs. Langford was still recovering from the attack. He knew that he couldn't let Karen get to her again, not if he wanted to have any chance of bringing her down. "You know, Karen, I've got to hand it to you," Ethan said, his tone deceptively casual. "You're a real piece of work, but you've made one crucial mistake." Karen's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan smiled, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. "You underestimated me." Before Karen could react, Ethan sprang into action, his fist connecting with her jaw in a sharp jab. Karen stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock and pain. You'll pay for that," she snarled, lunging forward. Ethan ducked and weaved, his years of martial arts training kicking in as he dodged Karen's frenzied blows. He knew that he couldn't keep this up forever, though. He needed to find a way to turn the tables and gain the upper hand. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He feigned a stumble, luring Karen in closer. As she moved in for the kill, Ethan spun around, slamming his elbow into her solar plexus. Karen let out a strangled gasp, and Ethan followed up with a sharp knee to her midsection, sending her crashing to the ground. Ethan stood over her, his chest heaving. "I told you, Karen," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You underestimated me." Karen glared up at him, her eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over, Ethan," she growled. "You may have won this round, but I'm not going down without a fight." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the thumb drive, holding it up for Karen to see. "Oh, it's over, all right," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "I've got all the evidence I need to bring you and your corrupt little empire down." Karen's eyes widened, and Ethan could see the panic starting to set in. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Try me," Ethan said, his finger hovering over the button that would upload the incriminating files to the internet. Karen's expression shifted, and Ethan could see the calculation in her eyes. "All right, Ethan," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "You win, for now. But mark my words, this isn't the last you've heard of me." Ethan nodded, his grip on the thumb drive tightening. "I'm counting on it, Karen," he said. Because I'm not going to stop until I've exposed every last one of your dirty secrets. As Karen stalked off, Ethan turned his attention to Mrs. Langford, who was watching the entire exchange with a mix of fear and awe. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mrs. Langford nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I am now, thanks to you," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan smiled, but the weight of what had just happened weighed heavily on his mind. He knew that his battle with Karen Wilkins was far from over, and that the stakes had just been raised even higher. The air was thick with tension as Ethan sat across the table from Agent Wilkins, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The FBI agent's face was unreadable, but Ethan could sense the gravity of the situation. "So, you're telling me that Karen Wilkins is an even bigger threat than we thought," Ethan said, his voice low and serious. Agent Wilkins nodded, her expression grave. "That's right," she said. "Our investigation has uncovered some disturbing information about the depth of her corruption and the influence she wields within the community." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "I knew she was bad, but this—" He shook his head, a sense of dread washing over him. "She's got connections at the highest levels of government, Ethan," Agent Wilkins continued, her eyes intense. "She's been using her position as the HOA president to line her own pockets and silence anyone who dares to challenge her." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "So, what does that mean for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Agent Wilkins leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "It means that you're in serious danger, Ethan," she said. "Karen Wilkins sees you as a threat, and she's not going to stop until she's eliminated you." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing with the implications of her words. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You need to go into hiding," Agent Wilkins said, her tone urgent. "We can offer you protection, but you have to trust us completely. No more going rogue, no more trying to take Karen down on your own." Ethan's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the overwhelming sense of fear that threatened to consume him. "I can't just sit back and let her win," he protested. Agent Wilkins held up a hand, her expression sympathetic. "I understand, Ethan, but you have to understand the gravity of the situation. Karen Wilkins is not someone to be trifled with. She's playing for keeps, and if you don't take this threat seriously, you may not live to see the end of this." Ethan's mind raced as he considered his options. On one hand, he knew that going into hiding was the safest course of action. But on the other, the thought of abandoning his crusade against the corrupt HOA felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. "What about the evidence I've gathered?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I go into hiding, what happens to that?" Agent Wilkins' expression softened. "Don't worry, Ethan," she said. "We'll make sure that the evidence is secure and that it's used to bring Karen Wilkins and her cronies down. But we need you to be safe in order to do that." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll go into hiding." Agent Wilkins let out a relieved sigh. "Good," she said. "We've already made the necessary arrangements. You'll be staying at a safe house until we can put together a plan to take down the HOA." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He knew that this was the right thing to do, but the thought of abandoning his home and his community weighed heavily on him. As he followed Agent Wilkins out of the room, Ethan couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of Karen Wilkins. He knew that she was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for her moment to strike. But Ethan was determined not to let her win. He had come too far to give up now, and he wasn't about to let Karen Wilkins or anyone else stand in his way. The safe house was exactly as Ethan had expected. A nondescript, unremarkable building tucked away in a quiet, residential neighborhood. As he stepped inside, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, his eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of danger. Agent Wilkins must have sensed his discomfort, because she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Ethan," she said, her voice calm and steady. "This place is completely secure. No one will be able to find you here." Ethan nodded, but the knot of tension in his stomach refused to loosen. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, I feel so helpless, you know. I should be out there, fighting against Karen and her corrupt HOA." Agent Wilkins sighed, her expression sympathetic. "I understand, Ethan," she said. "But right now, your safety has to be the top priority. We can't afford to take any risks, not with someone as ruthless and well-connected as Karen Wilkins." Ethan knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. He had dedicated so much time and energy to taking down the HOA, and the thought of sitting on the sidelines while the battle raged on was almost more than he could bear. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Now we wait," Agent Wilkins said, her tone matter-of-fact. "We've got our best agents working around the clock to gather more evidence against Karen and her associates. And in the meantime, you need to stay put and stay safe." Ethan felt a surge of anger, but he knew that lashing out at the agent would do him no good. "And what about the evidence I've already gathered?" he asked. "Are you sure it's safe?" Agent Wilkins nodded, her expression reassuring. "Absolutely," she said. "We've got a team of tech experts going through it with a fine-toothed comb. They're making sure that every piece of information is properly encrypted and secured." Ethan let out a relieved sigh, but the feeling of unease refused to subside. "And what about Karen?" he asked, his voice tense. "What if she tries to come after me again?" Agent Wilkins' expression hardened. "We're keeping a close eye on her," she said. "And we've got a team of agents ready to respond at a moment's notice if she tries anything." Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was missing something. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked, his eyes narrowed. Agent Wilkins hesitated, her expression guarded. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice low. Ethan felt his heart begin to race, a sense of dread washing over him. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been monitoring Karen's activities, and it seems that she's been getting more and more desperate," Agent Wilkins said, her tone grave. "We think she may be planning something big." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, his mind racing with the implications of her words. "What do you mean, something big?" he asked, his voice trembling. Agent Wilkins sighed, her expression pained. "We don't have all the details yet, but we've intercepted some communications that suggest she may be planning a terrorist attack." Ethan felt the world tilt on its axis, his mind reeling with the sheer magnitude of what she was saying. "A terrorist attack," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "But why? What could she possibly hope to gain from that?" Agent Wilkins shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "We're not sure," she said, "but we do know that she's desperate, and that she's willing to go to any lengths to protect her empire." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the true extent of Karen's depravity. She was willing to put innocent lives at risk, all in the name of preserving her own power and influence. And suddenly, Ethan knew that he couldn't just sit back and wait. He had to do something, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension as Ethan paced back and forth in the confines of the safe house, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. The revelation that Karen Wilkins was planning some sort of terrorist attack had shaken him to his core, and he knew that he couldn't just sit back and wait for the FBI to handle it. Agent Wilkins had urged him to stay put, to trust in the abilities of her team to take care of the situation. But Ethan knew that he couldn't afford to be passive, not when the lives of innocent people were at stake. "There has to be something I can do," he muttered to himself, his fingers drumming against the table as he tried to formulate a plan. Suddenly, an idea struck him. The thumb drive, he said aloud, his eyes widening with realization. If I can get that information to the right people, maybe I can stop Karen's plan before it's too late. Without a moment's hesitation, Ethan began to rummage through the various drawers and cabinets, searching for a way to access the internet. He knew that the safe house was designed to be impenetrable, but he also knew that he couldn't afford to let bureaucracy and red tape slow him down. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan finally found a laptop tucked away in a drawer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the security protocols with a skill that surprised even him. "Gotcha," he murmured, a triumphant grin spreading across his face as he plugged in the thumb drive. The files loaded quickly, and Ethan's heart raced as he scanned the incriminating evidence. There, buried deep within the financial records, was a series of wire transfers that led directly back to Karen Wilkins. And as he delved deeper, he found even more damning information. Plans for a massive bombing, a list of potential targets, and the names of the individuals involved in the plot. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the full extent of Karen's treachery. She was willing to sacrifice countless innocent lives just to preserve her own power and influence. And he knew that he couldn't let that happen, no matter what the cost. Quickly, he began to upload the files to a secure server, his fingers moving with a frenetic energy as he raced against the clock. He knew that it was only a matter of time before Agent Wilkins discovered what he was doing, and he had to act fast. Just as the upload was reaching its completion, the door to the safe house burst open, and Agent Wilkins stormed in, her eyes blazing with fury. "Ethan, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted, her voice laced with panic. Ethan didn't even look up, his focus laser-sharp as he continued to work. "I'm doing what I should have done from the beginning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm taking down Karen Wilkins and her corrupt HOA empire, once and for all." Agent Wilkins opened her mouth to protest, but Ethan cut her off. "This is bigger than just me, Agent Wilkins," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Karen is planning a terrorist attack, and I can't just sit back and let it happen." The agent's expression shifted, and Ethan could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low and serious. Ethan nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I am," he said, "and I need your help to stop her." Agent Wilkins let out a heavy sigh, but Ethan could see the determination in her eyes. "All right," she said, her voice resigned. "Let's do this." As the final files uploaded, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew that he was about to step into the eye of the storm, but he was ready. Because this was his fight, and he wasn't about to let Karen Wilkins win. The stage was set, and the final showdown was about to begin.